I planned to upload this like 2 days or so after the first part, and now it's 2 months. And in this entire time, the issue of ableism and harassment in the She-Ra fandom has sadly not died down at all. The second part will consist of interviews with several other disabled or neurodivergent fans of She-Ra, and I actually said that they could either send me a voice file or a Word document in which they had written their opinion, and all of them sent in the Word document, so I will reading their experience and opinion out. This is actually inspired by the Fansplaining podcast, very good podcast, and their episode about race and fandom and racism in fandom. Most Entrapdak fans are either disabled or neurodiverse or queer, or both. So of course aunties love to claim that this is not true, because it would mean that they are hurting minorities, but there are at least 2 Twitter polls to prove it. I hate that I have to say this, but aunties love to twist words. Disliking Entrapdak is not a problem. How they dislike it is the problem. It's just not being your thing because they are not your favorite characters or you're not a monster fucker is not your problem. It's no problem. But claiming you are morally right for disliking it, harassing people and using ableist arguments is a problem. Let's begin. How do you usually interact with fandom? What is your role in fandom? Which fandoms are you in? This is the only fandom I am part of. It's the first time I've ever been invested enough to ever actively participate in one. I usually write essays and analyzing characters, character arcs, motivations. I've also been the creator of many memes and shitposts along with some fan art on my own very fanfic. As far as interacting with the fandom itself, I'm usually the mother bear type that will defend fellow fans whenever drama is brewing. I'm an older fan, Entrapdak's age, so it's easier for me to emotionally detach from personal attacks that have been thrown at me for it. What is your disability and or neurodivergency? Are you part of other marginalized groups? I'm on the autism spectrum, a highly functioning autistic woman that has been diagnosed in her late 20s. I also have lumbar sciatica due to my profession. Do you think ableism in fandom exists, and what are your reasons for believing that? Yeah, it definitely exists. I've encountered a lot of it. Things that range from shaming disabled people or making fun of their disabilities to bullying neurodivergent fans because they are an easier target to get a rise out of. Some people do it deliberately because the drama amuses them, some do it accidentally, but it's a definite problem within the fandom. How does ableism and fandom shape your fandom experience? I'm an adult with a life in order. Words of internet strangers don't really bother me. At most, the obscenity and rudeness gets a lounge out of me. Other neurodivergent fans, however, are young, vulnerable, and definitely not as able to shrug it off with such ease. I find myself trying to defend them or at least comfort them. This had led to the confounding phenomenon of people trying to stop me from helping them or telling me that as an old person I should get a job instead of bothering with fandom or any other reason to justify allowing this bullying to continue. See the thread on Twitter that documents fan-on-fan aggression and the reactions of other fans in the comments and quote tweets that are defending things such as suicide baiting as harmless fun between kids. Where do you think this problem comes from? For the most part, a lack of empathy. It comes from a lot of the fandom splintering into small groups and religiously defending their opinions and actions. The people they surround themselves with are people just like them that share their opinions, and this has led to a process of distilling the extremes. It's a lot easier to hurt strangers if you see them as other, wrong, and deserving of this treatment. This process is coupled with an absence of critical thinking, where any options that differ from the group-accepted one is unfounded critique at best and personal attack to the creeds of said group at worst. People feel personally attacked when their favorite character or their own headcanon is questioned and violently lash out without even considering anything that is actually communicated. This fandom is, quite frankly, allergic to discussions and differing opinions. What do you think can disabled fans do on a small and on a large scale against it? On a small scale, my advice is you can't choose whether people try to offend or attack you, that's their choice. What you can do is choose whether you let yourself be offended by it. What some ill-mannered internet stranger tells me has no real-life impact on me beside my emotional reaction to their words. I choose to be amused by their idiocy rather than offended by their insults. Their assumptions tell more about them than about me. Someone calling me a white cis-het man is not going to make me a dude bro that watches football. It is, however, going to make me laugh at their inability to continue an argument logically. It's more a reflection of their failure to argument back and knee-jerk reaction to defending their convictions with any means possible rather than anything I might have done. On a large scale, the splintered groups of the fandom are locked in a pointless conflict that is mostly one-sided and exists solely to justify the self-victimization narrative that one group has going on. They thrive on this dynamic. The best reaction to their instigation of drama would be, that's rough, buddy, and doing our thing. Throughout the few months that I've been part of this fandom, I've been convinced that no amount of attempts at discussion or bringing logic and evidence is going to stop them from trying to target our group, especially the neurodivergent younger fans. You cannot convince someone of anything if they are not willing to listen. Ideal locats two interlocutors. If they don't want to listen to us, then I'm fine no longer listening and trying to argue with them. I'm done offering them a courtesy they will never return. I just love how short and clear this is. I would have probably rambled a lot more. And I appreciate the no bullshit attitude she has about aunties. It's very badass and something I try to acquire too. Next is a fan of color who was more comfortable with staying anonymous. How do you usually interact with fandom? What is your role in fandom? Which fandoms are you in? I used to be in the She-Ra and the Princesses of Power and the Owl House. I'm now in Animaniacs, KDA, Kipo and Infinity Train. What is your disability and or neurodivergency? Are you part of other marginalized groups? I am ADHD and self-diagnosed with autism, and then I have chronic back pains and tumors in my back. I'm also a bisexual woman of color. Do you think ableism in fandom exists? And what are your reasons for believing that? Ableism in fandom do exist. While most know and care for autistic people and those with ADHD, they often forget the other neurodivergent and physically disabled people apart from the disabled community. They never seem to consider these groups in their arguments and seem to forget other neurodivergents can be ableist to others and disabled people. And that ableism isn't just exclusive to being autistic and ADHD. How does ableism in fandom shape your fandom experience? It shapes my experience by feeling very left out, because my hyperfixations weren't the popular choice. I've seen many of my friends with similar experience deactivate or their fixations become triggers. I've seen my friends get death threats or have their identity completely erased. Not only have I experienced ableism, but colorism and racism by white fans and some other BIPOC who are fans that go after those with unpopular fixations, such as the entire She-Ra and the Princess of Power fandom when it comes to Entrapdak fans, who mostly consist of LGBT+, disabled and neurodivergent, victims of cults or different forms of abuse, and BIPOC. Sorry, I'm never really sure how to pronounce it. I've had white fans completely erase my identity without even knowing all because of what I liked not being the popular ship. I've been told to shut up when calling out the ableism in cast and gotten death threats, and along with white Latinos telling me to be silent when talking about the racist implications of Katra. It made them completely just leave fandoms, even ones where I felt really represented by characters. Where do you think this problem comes from? The problem comes from mostly younger fans thinking they're a part of this woke and purity culture, and I think most going through that big phase of finding out your identity and just consuming anything that caters to it and denying anything out of it, which ain't a bad thing. Everyone goes through it, and eventually they grow out of it and see their faults. This is also the work of purity and cancel culture, which gets abused and worked down to if you did or like something someone dislikes, then you are problematic. Not actually canceling them for serious things such as racism, sexism, LGBT+ phobic things, but just if you enjoy a form of content that someone else doesn't like. I've seen young children be called abuse sympathizers for enjoying villain characters or just drawing out of them. I've seen people bite me up and arms about that when people being biphobic or racist. Those who've been racist later become jokes and casually discussed on. I've seen my black friends and indigenous friends be called colonizers for liking a character who's black-coded, but was called a colonizer by the racist white show producer. Fandoms only care about the popular opinion rather than actually listening to minority groups. I've seen white fans use their friends through advocacy to justify their harassment of others. It's disgusting. What do you think can disabled fans do on a small and on a large scale against it? It could be stop caring about what the popular opinion is and lift up the voices of other disabled groups. Actually educate and also stop using your neurodivergency and disability as an excuse to harass other disabled and neurodivergent people. Stop using your entire identity to harass people. Call out your friends for being ableist and uneducated. Just stop caring about what others think and a temporary follower count and actually care about your community. I totally know feeling left out because my special interest isn't the popular thing to be excited about. I don't know why it raises an important point with how even the disability movement mostly focuses on ADHD and autistic people and tends to leave others out. It is definitely something we have to be aware of and continuously watch out to not do it when we are not disabled in these other ways ourselves. This other phenomena she brought up, of antis who are disabled or neurodiverse themselves using that trait as a shield to justify outright hunting down and bullying neurodiverse or disabled fans who have different opinions, is something I recognize as well. It's always just sad and shocking, and it's also really convenient for ableists, because here they have actual disabled people backing up their reviews, so you can't criticize them. Sadly, these people are usually too ignorant and hateful to be able to still talk with them and reach them, but just know that neurodiverse and disabled people can sometimes be ableists too. Our indication for this is when they do their best to harm other disabled people, as these antis do. But rampant racism is another thing that gets glossed over very often. As a white person, albeit of several other minority groups, I saw it. I saw antis justify being racist to actual fans of color just because, according to their arbitrary opinion, some character is racist or not poor, but I was not comfortable with exploring it further because it's just not my place to do that, and I could never understand it as well as fans of color do. Every white person should do their best to listen to them and support them. Imp Stole My Shoes is active on Tumblr and Twitter, where they are also quite prevalent and fighting against bullies in the fandom. Trigger warnings for a short mention of rape in this part. How do you usually interact with fandom? What is your role in fandom? Which fandoms are you in? I'm most active in She-Ra right now. I don't usually become involved with any fandom enough to devote a lot of dedication to it, but Shira changed that for me because of Hordak and how he relates to me. Usually I talk about fandoms and fem groups. Now I write, roleplay or draw, and I'm in bigger groups on Discord with dedicated fans of Shira. That's how I interact with the fandom. What is your disability and/or neurodivergency? Are you part of other marginalized groups? I have autism, ADHD, epilepsy, OCD, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. It feels strange to say marginalized group about this, but this is one that is noteworthy for not being respected or treated well. I've been raped and have post-cult trauma. These two things are things people don't take very seriously either, because they don't understand it or they accuse these things of being your fault when it's something you could not have controlled. There's a lot of hate and negativity by people who just don't understand and don't care to think they know more about your trauma while never having experienced it. It's unfortunate and very harmful to people with trauma to the point it could push people to suicide. It's very serious. Do you think ableism in fandom exists? And what are your reasons for believing that? I absolutely do. I've experienced it a lot in the Shira fandom. It's pushed so many of my friends out of the fandom. I myself have experienced a lot of my triggers being forcibly used to hurt me. A disability eraser by fans and even fans that erase characters' disabilities like Hordaks in order to either push me down or defend their nonsensical arguments. Hordak got me through the months directly after leaving the cult. Just knowing there was a character I could relate to so much. And while I was telling my story on Twitter, I once had someone erase my post-cult trauma and my story of how Hordak helped me through by both stating they knew how cults worked and how horrible a cult is, but that Hordak was both not mentally traumatized or had been in a cult despite the creator of the show stating he was in a cult. They proceeded to yell at me and berate me over liking a character that is not real, as though I was not allowed to have survived my cult trauma through Hordak. How does ableism and fandom shape your fandom experience? The ableism I experienced only wants me to fight more for my friends and myself. It does not affect how I feel about the show unless it's the creator saying something. It makes me feel bad, but I realize you have to separate a character from the creator in that instance. So many people worked on the show and with that characters, not just one. And so it makes me feel better to know that I have and never will put up with bullies. And I will not allow them to hurt my friends and fellow NDs. Where do you think this problem comes from? Honestly, I think that it stems from a lack of exposure and teaching when people are young. And it's fueled by ableist parents and their environment. And then in turn encouraged by the fandoms and how creators act. What do you think can disabled fans do on a small and on a large scale against it? Those who can stand up for those who can't, and those who can't bring attention to it and make it known we won't tolerate it. Form a union with each other and make sure you stand up for each other. The next interview is from LP, and she's on Twitter and Tumblr, but under a different name. How do you usually interact with fandom? What is your role in fandom? Which fandoms are you in? My interactions with fandom I am in vary, depending on the kind of fandom itself, on the size of the fandom, whether any of my close friends are part of the fandom, and other factors. In general, though, most of my interaction with fandom consists of consuming fan-made content, particularly fan art, fan fiction, fan videos, etc., and supporting the creators of said content by liking and sharing their work I like on social media, reblogging on Tumblr and retweeting on Twitter. I have also been a fan artist myself for several years now, running a small deviant art account as a hobby. Aside from that, my ways of interacting with fandoms are rather passive and limited. Hardly ever do I start or engage in conversations or discussions with other fans, aside from my close online friends, when it comes to opinions, headcanons, etc. Instead, I prefer to let my opinions known by sharing posts I agree with. Fandoms I am in, with varying degrees of my interactions with them: My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, The Arcana, Undertale, Steven Universe, Dinosaur Train, Toad Patrol, Good Omens, Frozen, Howl's Moving Castle, Minecraft, My Hero Academia, The Great Gatsby. What is your disability and/or neurodivergency? Are you part of other marginalized groups? I am an autistic 18-year-old girl diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and mild social anxiety, on the present getting therapy and medical treatment. Being an asexual demi-romantic, I am also part of the LGBTQIA+ community. Do you think ableism and fandom exists, and what are your reasons for believing that? I definitely believe ableism and fandom exists, as it does in every other part and aspect of society and is deeply ingrained in people's everyday lives. Another reason for believing so is that representation of disabled and neurodivergent people in media, therefore the canon material of fandoms are based off, is itself still often subjected to harmful stereotypes and stigma, misinterpretations, bad writings, and so often not done properly. How does ableism and fandom shape your fandom experience? It undoubtedly worsens my experience and ability to fully enjoy the fandom. Witnessing disabled, neurodivergent characters getting misunderstood, misinterpreted, and/or even hated by fans on the basis of being disabled or neurodivergent can be really unpleasant. However, probably the worst is when disabled neurodivergent fans get harassed, ridiculed, silenced, or assaulted by ableist neurotypical abled fans for speaking up, calling out ableism, or simply voicing their opinions, views, and feelings. Such behavior is unacceptable. Where do you think this problem comes from? As mentioned above, I believe it comes primarily from the systemic, deep ingrained ableism, stigma, and prejudice present in society, lack of education and understanding, as well as not listening to disabled people and not letting disabled neurodivergent creators write for characters with said or similar disabilities. What do you think can disabled fans do on a small and large scale against it? Sadly, in my view, our possibilities are very limited. I definitely think making posts which address and call out and educate on these issues on blogs and other social media is a wonderful, factual, and straightforward way of bringing attention to these issues, And I'm immensely grateful to creators who put time and effort into such posts and analysis. Aside from that, though, it is difficult for me to think of other effective ways. I totally agree. It is very difficult to do something as a single person against the issues. LP also has a point with this being a systemic issue. Thank you for participating. So, last but not least, I will talk about my own experience. And please ignore the voices from outside. It's very sunny here, so there are a lot of families with small children outside. How do you usually interact with fandom? What's your role in fandom? I make fan art and fan fiction. Sometimes I also write meta. How is this pronounced? Make GIFs, GIFs. Oh, damn! My problem is I read English a lot, but hardly ever hear it, and so I have a lot of words from which I don't know how to pronounce them. Yeah, also I make fan videos from time to time. And of course I reblog stuff from others. Right now I'm mostly in She-Ra, but also in Star Trek, particularly Star Trek Discovery. And for a very long time I was in Babylon 5, but I had to leave because it was very toxic. What's your disability and/or neurodivergency? Are you part of other marginalized groups? I am autistic, and I was very ashamed of it as I was younger, but by now it's became a quite important part of me. Through the trauma from being abused by my peers because I am autistic, I also have severe bipolar disorder and also some other mental illnesses. I take medication for that, but said medication also causes physical side effects. But I rather have these side effects than depression. And outside of that, I'm also a bisexual woman. Do you think ableism in fandom exists? And what are your reasons for believing that? Oh, it definitely exists. I had this suspicion already in the Babylon 5 fandom because the most hated character was very heavily autistic coded, and other characters had way larger crimes, but somehow everybody hated him the most. But I couldn't prove anything because it was very subtle and very covert. It's very more overt in the She-Ra fandom. There's not a single day without direct or covert ableist hate on Twitter, and it's slightly more rare on Tumblr, but it's definitely still existing. There are just so much higher standards for Hordak and Entrapdak than abled neurotypical or neurotypical passing characters, like Catra. And they are called bad rap for things other characters are praised for. Also, almost all anti-arguments are based on ableist ideas. So, Entrapdak is called childlike, innocent, and unfit to make decisions. Entrapdak is described in terms real life physically disabled people are often called. And I actually saw several physically disabled fans talking about that and how much that hurts. Because the aunties call him gross and old man and not worth existing. Very often, the aunties also use psychological problems against people and gaslight and use other abuse tactics like Darvo. For example, they purposefully triggered someone, they sent death threats, they suicide bait. How does ableism in fandom shape your fandom experience? It feels a bit dangerous to talk about this because the aunties want to hurt people and they want to affect people negatively and drive them out of fandom. So I'm a bit afraid that by talking about how much this hurt me, I'm giving them what they want, but it really, really took the fun out of it. It's also quite, I can't describe it any other way than traumatizing to see just how many people don't think you are a person and that you shouldn't be allowed to have relationships, that you shouldn't be allowed to be happy, that you shouldn't be allowed to make own decisions. This hostility, especially on Twitter. On Twitter, it doesn't feel like doing your thing because you are having fun with it. It just feels like being constantly in a state of alert and just defending yourself and not doing much else. And this wasn't always the case. I remember that as I got into the fandom, Twitter was super nice, and it was actually an escape from the toxic Babylon 5 fandom. But now you can't even go into the text anymore because these aunties deliberately clog this text with their hate, and then they have the nerve to pretend that harassing disabled people, neurodiverse people, some kind of morally pure because they like villains, while they are liking villains and themselves. But of course it's different because these villains are conventionally attractive and female and abled and neurotypical. It got to the point where I was actually nervous to even participate in online fandom. And people say that trauma makes you stronger, but sadly I am not one of these people. I was bullied very heavily, and I have a lot of trauma because of that, and sadly my trauma just made me weaker and more sensitive, so this stuff is going directly into all of my triggers, and it's not nice. I honestly thought about leaving, but there are just no other couples consisting of people like me anywhere in media, and the thing is you can't just change special interests, sadly. And also leaving would have felt like doing what the aunties want, and I don't want to give them what they want. What is also incredibly frustrating is seeing how much hate these people spin all the time, and that they are saying things that are very blatantly wrong. both about the show and on a larger and more dangerous note about certain disabilities or minorities. And they just don't get any consequences. And you can't do or give them consequences because they are too ignorant to react when you prove them wrong. Because they are loving themselves so extremely that when something proves them wrong, they just don't believe it. From time to time, there are ones that get suspended by Twitter, but they usually have second accounts and they say Twitter is homophobic instead of finally realizing that they are just horrible people who should change. I just hope that this purity culture bullshit finally stops in some time, because it's just so exhausting. Where do you think this problem comes from? It's an intersection of antis, aka purity culture, with systemic ableism. Ableism is systemic, and that means it is part of society. It is taught in school, journalism and fiction. And you, over the course of your whole life, you hear these ableist ideas again and again, and so it's especially pervasive, more so as if this came only from hearing it one time or so. Most of these antis probably never met an openly disabled person in real life, so they only know stereotypes. And this means that the stereotypes feel true. On the flip side, seeing autistic or physically disabled people, how they are in reality, feels wrong then. So it has to be fitted into their idea of how a disabled person is. See, Entrapdak is like a child and manipulated by Hordak, or Hordak is not disabled. And the second part of it are antis. They rely on their ideology feeling right. Because if you are young and don't know how extreme this goes and how harmful this can be, doing morally wrong things or thinking morally wrong things means you are wrong, feels like a thing that is true. Because of that, they are preying on children, because children don't have as much life experience as older people, and so lesser often understand how damaging having to be pure 100% of the time is. Also, antis and ship wars need enemies. They have a fixation on characters who are exactly like them, but neither Entrapdak nor Hordak are like them, so they so the representation they are is also overlooked. Also, through the ingrained systemic ableism, disabled characters and fans already feel wrong, so they are a good target. Another point is that neurodiverse and disabled fans are very often traumatized because society is very ableist and traumatizes them through how they are treated. But traumatized people react in ways that are, well, make them easier targets for them, and also more fun targets, because bullies think it's funny when someone is hurting. What do you think can disabled fans do on a small and on a large scale? On a large scale, sadly not much, since through systemic factors, the disabled fans are rarely the ones in a position of power. On a small scale, the most important thing is to find like-minded fans and communicate with them. If you have enough spoons, show ableists their behavior will not be tolerated. If you have not enough spoons, report the tweet or reblock if possible. Block the person. Ask others with enough energy to deal with this for help. Document it and add it to Sorane's Twitter thread. Also share block lists and use Twitter blockchain on Chrome. It lets you block all followers of one troll with one click, and it's very useful, especially, well, only on Twitter. Sadly, there is not such a thing for Tumblr, but that is where block lists are for. Also, another thing is that positive content about your faves is more effective than anger because it directs attention away from the hate. Easy ways to do this that don't take much energy because all this stuff is very draining and you often don't have energy are screen caps, maybe with captions. You can Deep Dream edit screen caps. Deep Dream is a program that makes it possible to basically copy the art style of something and overlay it on the other picture you put into it, and it's really nice. It makes such beautiful pictures with so less effort. You can also put random surface level observations on your Twitter or Tumblr. And the way I do this is look at the word generator and then write down the first thing that comes to mind. Of course, also higher effort stuff like art, thick and deep meta is very good, but these are ways that are easy to do and require not much energy. It's also possible to prepare these beforehand and publish if there is especially much hate. What is also very important and healing even is taking days or even months off of toxic pages. I know it feels like you have to fight constantly, but this is needed to be able to continue to fight. And you don't really own anybody your energy, even if it feels like this. I even made a list of reminders for disabled fans, and I put it in the links. I really wish I could end this on a more positive note, but I hope that this at least showed you that you are not alone and that there are others like you.